Whoosh! A brown-haired woman named Gyul runs for her life, panting that she has no money as someone demands it. Her pursuer, a dark-haired man, scoffs at her denial, demanding she hand over the money. Gyul clenches her fists, terrified he'll take her food money, while he raises his hand to strike. Ugh! He shoves her hard, sending her stumbling back with a clunk. She falls backward into the open air. Tumbling through the sky, she wonders if this is how she dies. She covers her face, lamenting her tragic death over a fight for money. Her life flashes before her eyes, born to a poor family with a drunken ex-con father and a mother who eventually left. After her mother left, her father found her and began hounding her again for money to pay off his new debts. She endured by working part-time jobs. She did it all because of her family, even as her father watched her with a menacing look from a balcony. In a celestial realm, a prophecy declares that the seed of resurrection, Mabel, has been planted. Elsewhere, a white-haired man in a grand uniform remarks that the princess has grown, while a blonde woman agrees, crediting a higher power. The man, holding a tiny pink-haired baby, smiles down at her as she realizes in shock that she's been reborn. Her new home is a magnificent, sprawling palace. Overwhelmed, the reborn baby lets out a loud "wah." The blonde woman soothes the crying baby, shocked by the outburst. The baby pauses her crying, her eyes wide with the stunning realization she is a princess. As her clothes are changed in a lavish room, she's speechless at the stark contrast to her previous life in the place she was born. She learns she is the second child of Hermes Emperor and sees a portrait of her older brother. Apparently, her frail mother died not long after giving birth to her. Expecting her father to shun her for causing his wife's death, she sees the white-haired man observing her from afar. The blonde woman lays her down, and the baby dismisses a mysterious voice she heard as just a dream. Her eyes shut as she succumbs to the constant sleepiness of being a newborn. The blonde woman is startled as the white-haired man enters, greeting him as His Majesty. He gestures for silence as the baby wakes cautiously. Sparkle. Their eyes meet for the first time. His gaze softens in surprise as he sees her brilliant blue eyes. The baby's brilliant, gem-like eyes stare back at him. A gentle, warm smile spreads across the white-haired emperor's face. He quietly observes that she's calm now, but the baby blinks, confused by what the woman just called him. She questions if this man is her father as he smiles, pleased by her quiet gaze. His handsome smile is framed by floating flowers. She internally panics, shocked that this young man is her father and not her brother. The emperor reaches his hand toward her twitching form. She flinches and clenches her eyes shut, instinctively bracing for a blow. But instead of pain, she opens her eyes to a shower of beautiful tulips. The emperor praises her for recognizing her father, calling her clever, and murmuring the name Sienna. He looks wistful, saying Sienna would have been even happier than he is. The baby realizes her mother's name was Sienna, as a maid observes from afar. With a gentle tap, he promises to protect her, calling her by her new name, Mabel. His eyes, filled with adoration, gaze upon his daughter. The emperor, surrounded by flowers, thinks to himself how adorable she is. Indignant, Mabel reflexively squeezes his finger, frustrated that her baby instincts are being misinterpreted. She recalls a memory of her past self, Gyul, happily held by her loving father. But the happy memory twists into one of her father's monstrous abuse. Now Mabel, she resolves to expect nothing from anyone and to live a quiet life, free from the need for affection. Her new world is dominated by three powerful nations, the Devlin, Holy Abelardo, and Ermino empires. The Holy Abelardo Empire is home to the exalted agents of the god Hades. A priest recites the oracle about the seed of resurrection as a massive thunderstorm with a crack of lightning strikes the Ermino imperial palace on the day of Mabel's birth. In the Holy Empire of Abelardo, a leader is certain that Mabel is the child from the oracle. He dispatches a dark-haired man to the Ermino Empire to formally petition that Mabel be sent to them. Russell, Emperor Esteban, reviews a formal petition. A nervous aide addresses His Majesty. Bang! An angry fist hits the table. Tapping his desk, the emperor thinks of his son Oscar, knowing Mabel is not in line for the throne. He laments that they are insisting on taking the sleeping Mabel. Shout! The emperor roars his refusal. He stands firm amidst flying papers. The aide sighs, worrying how long they can ignore the Holy Empire's pleas. Peeking from a doorway, a young boy named Oscar overhears the need for a valid reason to refuse them. Stagger, he trips over a vision of strawberries and gems. Scurry, Oscar quickly flees down the hall. Turn, his father calls out his name, Oscar. Step, step. Oscar approaches his father's office. He formally greets the Emperor. His father asks what brings him here. A title card introduces Oscar el Hermano, the first prince. He asks when his father will grant permission. The Emperor feigns ignorance, asking for what? Oscar demands to see his baby sister Mabel, but his father flatly refuses. He protests, reminding his father of his promise. Smash. The Emperor recalls Oscar's clumsy history, certain he would drop Mabel. Oscar pleads, but his father insists he has a good reason. Rip, rip. Oscar droops like a sad puppy, dejected that he can't see Mabel on her 1-month birthday. The Emperor smiles, relenting as he reaches for something on his desk. Pat, Pat. He pats Oscar's head, telling his surprised son to come with him. Sullen, Mabel finds baby life incredibly boring. Flail. She struggles against her blankets, feeling trapped and frustrated. Blink, blink, her heavy eyelids close as she drifts off to sleep. 2 maids watch over the sleeping princess. The maids note she's fallen asleep again, just before it's time for her to eat. A servant's arrival startles the maids. The Emperor and Oscar appear in the doorway. Jolt. A familiar voice startles Mabel awake. She is annoyed to see the smiling Emperor again. Sulk. Mabel finds his constant fawning uncomfortable. The Emperor coos at her, and she wishes she'd pretended to be asleep. Oscar stares down at his baby sister. Captivated. Flush, he excitedly tells his father that Mabel is looking right at him. The Emperor dismisses it, but Oscar retorts that his father thought the same thing. Beaming, he thinks she's cute. Touched, Oscar hears her babble, wondering if she's trying to say something. He excitedly claims Mabel called him brother, but the Emperor insists she was trying to say father, as Mabel internally denies both. Chuckle, the Emperor is amused, while Mabel is bewildered by their nonsense. Jolt, Mabel glares at her nanny, pleading for help, which startles the woman. Oh! The nanny mistakes her cries for hunger and calls for milk, much to Mabel's dismay. As the nanny prepares to feed her, Mabel wonders if her father and brother will watch the whole time. Suck! The Emperor and Oscar watch intently as Mabel begins to eat. Gulp! Gulp. Mabel drinks as fast as she can, hoping they'll leave, while Oscar's heart pounds. Huff, huff, she pants for breath after drinking half the bottle. Lean, the baby looks up with wide, innocent eyes. Lift, the Emperor scoops Mabel into his arms, shocking Oscar. He gazes down at her with pure, sparkling adoration. Mabel stares back, her eyes wide with bewilderment. The Emperor laughs, offering her a spoonful of food, but Mabel flails and wails, vehemently refusing. Focused. A miniature version of the Emperor concentrates on feeding the crying baby. Frown, Mabel reluctantly accepts the bottle, knowing she can't win against an adult. Gulp, he watches her intently as she drinks, making her wish she could just get this over with. Lean, the Emperor's intense gaze falls upon her. Flinch, Mabel recoils slightly as her father holds her close, his gentle expression unsettling her. Coo, coo, doves settle on a fountain just before water spurts violently. Splash, as the fountain erupts, a nearby couple admires the powerful and refreshing display. Cough, cough, a series of coughs echoes from within the palace room. Drip, drip, the Emperor looks down in shock, drenched in milk spit up from Mabel. Gasp, Oscar and the servants stare in horror, crying out for his majesty. Sparkle, the Emperor smiles blissfully, declaring her spit up is as precious as holy water. Wipe, wipe. A hand cleans Mabel's mouth as she questions what on earth he just said. She internally fumes, aghast that he compared her milk spit up to holy water. The Emperor calmly dabs his cheek while Mabel stares, utterly mortified by his delusion. Twitch, Mabel can't believe the maids are looking on so touched, wondering if she's the only sane one here. Clench, Oscar calls out to his father and approaches, giving Mabel a glimmer of hope that he sees the madness. Sparkle. Oscar's eyes light up with adoration as he looks on. The Emperor thinks Oscar's about to make an important point, but Oscar nervously retracts his statement. Pat, Pat. The Emperor praises his son's understanding while Mabel groans, feeling dizzy from their bizarre dynamic. Chirp, chirp, a bright new day begins at the magnificent palace. Pop, the Emperor peeks into Mabel's room, calling her name with a wide grin. He laughs happily, calling for a still sleeping Mabel from the doorway. Peek, Oscar quietly sneaks a look at his sleeping sister, holding a bouquet of flowers. Sigh, Mabel lies in her crib, annoyed that Oscar is secretly visiting her again. Mabel flinches at her gaudy mobile and recalls the story of its creation. The Emperor smashed a priceless imperial heirloom with a sword, ignoring his subjects' pleas, all for her development. As two servants chat, Mabel internally babbles that her father is clearly not all there. The servants gossip about a rumor of a golden-furred, cat-like guardian deity hatching from an egg. The female servant insists the rumor caused a frenzy, while the male servant dismisses it. Drool. Mabel's mouth waters at the thought of eggs, finding the servants bickering amusing. Flick, flick, she proudly realizes she can now move her fingers and even jingle a toy. Determined, Mabel steels herself for her next great challenge, holding her own head up. Fume, she fails and tears well up in her eyes, frustrated with her slow progress. Wah! She cries in frustration, unable to walk, talk, or even kick her legs properly. Tiptoe. Oscar peeks in and beams, happy to find Mabel awake for his secret visit. Dash. He rushes joyfully to his sister's crib, calling her name with a wide smile. Rush, the blonde nanny, Madame Rufy, hurries to stop Oscar from touching the princess with dirty hands. Bang. Madame Rue's warning about the Emperor is cut short as the doors burst open. Huff, huff, Mabel pants with exhaustion after another valiant but failed attempt to lift her head. Madame Rufy notices Mabel's sweat and immediately worries that she has a cold. Dash, a maid, is sent sprinting from the room to summon a physician at once. A now clean Oscar, holding a cloth, asks Madame Ruby what the commotion is about. Oscar's face fills with shock and concern. Dash, he rushes to Mabel's side, calling her name in a panic. Madame Rufy reassures a worried Oscar that Mabel's weak voice must mean she is very sick. Mabel silently fumes, realizing these people don't understand her at all. She gives up and turns her head away, deciding to let them think what they want. Everyone panics, begging Mabel not to lose consciousness while she internally screams that she's just dying of embarrassment. Murmur, the Emperor storms down the hall as his aides frantically try to stop him. Grab, burst, the doors fly open, making Oscar and Madame Rufy flinch in surprise. A panicked Emperor rushes into the room, calling out for his daughter. Flinch, he approaches the crib and gently reaches for Mabel, his expression softening. Touch, his finger gently brushes her cheek, and her large blue eyes open in surprise. His face hardening with worry, the Emperor angrily demands to know where the physician is. The physician calmly explains he believes the princess's sweating was just a sudden flash of heat. An adorable Mabel babbles from her crib. Mabel internally praises the physician's correct guess, but questions the cause. Knowing the palace temperature is magically regulated, the physician nervously assures the Emperor that she is fine. The Emperor gently lifts Mabel, telling her she's not ill, as the staff watches with relief. He walks away, protectively holding his daughter close. 10 minutes earlier, the Emperor sighs during a meeting, as an official reports that transporting a prisoner has been difficult and resulted in injuries. A hooded figure is described as one of the Empire's biggest headaches. This so-called demon from the enemy Empire, Devlin, began a massacre without armor or weapons. His merciless killing spree earned him the infamous title, the Demon of Devlin. His identity remained a mystery until he was captured during a border war a month ago. The soldiers were shocked to discover the fearsome demon was an unconscious, dark-haired young man. Back at the meeting, the Emperor asks for the prisoner's current location. An official reports the prisoner is still out of control, delaying his arrival, which piques the Emperor's interest. Whisper. An aide delivers shocking news. Bang. The Emperor slams his fist down in fury. The Emperor stands abruptly, his face a mask of rage as his aide looks on in alarm. The other council members watch in stunned silence. Murmur. The officials realize the Emperor's anger must be related to the newborn princess, Mabel. They gossip that Princess Mabel is the only reason for the Emperor's recent calm, noting she has her mother's hair and her father's eyes. Shudder. The men tremble in fear at the implication of her being unwell. They believe the princess is the only person preventing the Emperor from reverting to his bloodthirsty self. A glowing emblem declares that she is the Empire's only hope. A maid asks Madame Rufy what's happening, and she explains everyone was worried because the princess was unwell. Mabel sleeps peacefully in her crib, completely unaware of the chaos. Servants inspect a new blanket as an aide declares it too coarse for the princess. Madame Rufy directs her staff, sending a maid named Larima to pack, and a servant named Ravi to fetch the stroller. Oscar smiles happily at his sister, who internally refutes his baby talk. Sulk. Mabel looks miserable, bundled in a hand-knitted hat and winter clothes. A close-up highlights the unnecessarily ornate baby stroller. Bundled thickly in the stroller, Mabel wishes to be left alone, bewildered by the extreme measures like smashing an heirloom for her carriage. The grand, sunlit exterior of the palace comes into view. Sparkle, sparkle. Mabel's eyes widen with wonder at the palace's size, and she decides a trip outside isn't so bad after all. Whoosh, the perspective zooms out, revealing Mabel alone on a vast, cold balcony as she immediately regrets her decision. As the servant worries she's cold, Mabel shivers, confirming the palace's magical heating. Yank, a concerned Oscar, whips off his coat. Mabel peeks out from under Oscar's coat, which now completely covers her stroller. The Emperor arrives, and the servants greet him as he notes Mabel is outside. The Emperor stares down with a stern, unreadable expression. Grab. A teary-eyed Oscar clutches his father's leg. Lift. Tumble. The Emperor scoops Mabel from the stroller, sending Oscar tumbling to the ground. He smiles adoringly, holding his daughter high in the air. Flap. He gently places his own magnificent cloak over her for warmth. The Emperor instructs the others to proceed as they look on. A maid marvels at the precious fabric of the cloak, while Mabel internally complains that he just threw it at her. The Emperor watches as Oscar is now pushed in the stroller through a garden of roses. In the northern forest, the royal children and their attendants enjoy a picnic by a serene lake. Mabel looks up at a vast blue sky. She recalls the pitch-black, starless sky of her past life as Gullion. A kind, white-haired boy with green eyes smiles warmly. Held by the boy, Mabel wonders why Oscar likes her so much. Oscar announces his arrival to a maid, explaining he finished training early because he heard Mabel was going outside and wanted to join his little sister for her first time. Mabel internally declares she's never considered them her family. As the Emperor holds her, she accepts she was born their family, and her past isn't their fault. Pause. A surprised, brown-haired man looks on. The season shifts to spring, as Mabel, Oscar, and two maids relax on a blanket. Ba-bump, Mabel's heart pounds as she stares in shock. A guardian deity, she thinks, with wide-eyed wonder. She realizes the cat-like deity Robbie mentioned was real, unlike anything from her old world. A maid named Larima accuses Ravi of lying about a kitten, but he insists it's real and urges her to look. A bored Mabel reluctantly agrees to go with Oscar. A blonde-haired maid gently takes a sleepy Mabel from Oscar. The maid suggests Mabel stay behind, but she cries out, wanting to go with Oscar. Oscar promises to be right back for Mabel. Flap, white doves take flight over a lush forest. Huff, huff, Mabel crawls determinedly through the grass until the blonde maid scoops her up, leaving her confused. A concerned Oscar asks his nanny when Mabel will be able to talk to him. Whoosh! A voice suddenly calls out Mabel's name. Oscar is stunned, wondering if Her Imperial Highness just said kitten, but the nanny dismisses it as impossible. Mabel babbles, "Kit, kit," desperately trying to tell them to take her with them. Ravi and Larima excitedly agree she's trying to say kitten, as Mabel internally urges them not to see the deity without her. Jolt. Mabel realizes with a gasp that it was a mistake to talk so early. She reflects that while her body is a 1-year-old, her mind is not. She recalls her past self, an adult named Gyul Yoon. Sparkles squeeze, and overjoyed Larima hugs Mabel tightly, calling her a genius, while Mabel struggles to breathe. Droop, a dejected Oscar, sits down, lamenting that Mabel's first word was kit instead of brother, feeling he lost to a kitten. Mabel looks on, finally understanding why he was so hurt. Wave, wave, she reaches for him, thinking he's being silly. Oscar looks up in hopeful surprise, wondering if she wants him. He happily rushes over to hug her, thrilled that she asked for him first. Jolt, Mabel shouts, kid again, demanding they go to the forest now that he's happy. Oscar holds a beaming Mabel in his arms. Smirk. Mabel agrees to see the kitten, pleased that this will keep them from thinking she's a genius. They arrive at a quiet, sun-dappled section of the forest. The group looks around, disappointed, as Oscar concludes Ravi was lying. While Larima chases a panicked Ravi, Oscar decides it was a prank and suggests they go back. Glance, Mabel looks around skeptically as Oscar wonders if Ravi was just joking. Stare, Mabel feels a pang of disappointment, but then a sudden glint of light in the trees shocks her. As the nanny calls out, "Kit!" in surprise, Oscar tells a thrilled Mabel to be careful. He gasps, realizing she really wants to see it too. Sparkle, a tiny golden cat-like creature appears, leaving the entire group in awe of the guardian deity. As the creature approaches, Mabel accepts she truly has been reborn into a different world. As Oscar holds her closer, Mabel lets out a sudden achoo, and the startled creature leaps away. Rustle, the creature vanishes into the foliage, leaving a disappointed Mabel, wishing she'd seen more. Back in her room, Oscar promises they'll play again soon, and Mabel regrets asking for a hug. On their way back, Oscar worriedly asks the nanny if Mabel might have caught a cold from sneezing. The nanny reassures him she seems fine, but admits she is a little concerned. Gasp, Oscar realizes with alarm that perhaps they were outside for too long. Here, riding in her carriage, Mabel spots someone in the distance. A stern-looking woman with long brown hair and a uniform is identified as Duchess Donovan. A stern woman is revealed as Oscar's birth mother. The Emperor's first wife was an arranged marriage to Pacifica Donovan. Mabel narrates that her mother died soon after her birth. Oscar finds his mother scary while Mabel stares back from her bassinet. Mabel believes her existence irritates the Empress as a servant calls to her. Clunk, clunk, she feels despised as her stroller is wheeled past the cold Empress. Phew, Oscar and Madame Rufy sigh in relief, now alone in the garden. Bang, a sudden commotion erupts as a dark figure causes chaos nearby. Mabel looks on, her blue eyes wide with curiosity. Knights brace themselves, gripping their swords tightly in anticipation. Kwoosh, the prisoner is revealed to be a small, hooded child surrounded by dark energy. The knights find themselves unable to move as a voice shouts a warning. Bang, thud, someone yells to attack while their defenses are down. Boom, dark magic erupts, sending knights flying through the air. Mabel looks on in shock as a voice asks if she's all right. Whoosh, a dark shadow passes, revealing the boy's face underneath his hood. The mysterious boy glares, his piercing red eyes glowing. Thump, a close-up, shows the intense power in his crimson eye. A divine light surrounds Mabel as she stares back at him. The two lock eyes, and it feels as if they are the only two people there. Mabel stares with a look of wide-eyed surprise. A worried Oscar tells his nanny that it's too dangerous and they must leave. Jolt. Madame Rufy agrees and quickly begins to push the stroller away. Whoosh. They rush away from the garden as the battle rages on. Stagger. The hooded boy begins to falter, his strength failing. Thud, he collapses to the ground as a voice declares it's their chance. Ba-bump. Mabel's heart beats as she watches the boy fall. Oscar stands protectively in front of his sister's stroller. The grand palace stands tall against a clear sky. Inside a magnificent hall, a man asks, "Pardon?" A red-haired knight reports they were moving the prisoner to the underground prison. He explains that the prisoner went wild on the palace grounds, resisting capture. The Emperor's aide frets that the prisoner encountered Princess Mabel on her first trip outside. Having heard the news, the Emperor calmly holds a sleeping Mabel. The aide asks in disbelief if the powerful prisoner really lost consciousness. A voice explains he likely ran out of strength after expending his enchanted powers. Grab, a hand reaches for the doorknob of the Emperor's study. Click, the door opens, revealing the Emperor at his desk. The aide is pleased to see His Majesty working quietly. Glance, the Emperor looks up and coldly asks, "What?" The aide stands at the doorway to deliver a report about Princess Mabel. Ack. The Emperor's intense stare makes the aide panic internally. He quickly clarifies that the princess is unharmed and was far from the incident. The Emperor calmly sips his tea, and his aide questions the unexpectedly mild reaction. The aide happily adds that Mabel saw the guardian deity and said, "Kit," and the Emperor's expression freezes. Shatter. The teacup breaks in the Emperor's hand. Ka-ching, the aide internally panics, realizing that teacup was very expensive. The Emperor menacingly calls out to his aide, Gustav, demanding to know what he said. Dudan. As Gustav repeats the word "Kit," the Emperor's power flares again. Smash. The aide despairs, realizing a 1,000-year-old heirloom tribute was just destroyed. The aide laments the disgrace of the shattered heirloom. Jolt. The aide internally panics, wondering what has gotten into the Emperor, leaning over the broken gift. The Emperor's fury builds, as his aide suspects he's upset about missing his daughter's first word. The Emperor summons Gustav to follow him, while the aide internally questions his priorities before complying. Rube. Gustav stifles a laugh, finding the Emperor's reaction to missing Mabel's first word absurd. In the princess's quarters, Madame Rufy orders a maid named Larima to draw the curtains. Mabel internally complains that it's too hot, annoyed they're overheating the room just because she sneezed. Twirl. As a chandelier glitters above, she realizes whining will only be misinterpreted. Resigned, she decides to stay still, trusting the magically regulated palace will cool down soon. Elsewhere, the dark-haired prisoner's piercing red eyes glow with intensity. Step, the Emperor arrives with his aide for a brief visit, greeted by a maid. Raise, the Emperor lifts Mabel, asking about her time outside as she internally grumbles about his constant presence. Lift, he hoists her higher, noticing she feels heavier. The maid confirms she just finished her meal. He asks why she's sweating, and the maid explains she used his cloak to keep Mabel from catching a cold. The Emperor spots an unfamiliar toy, demanding to know if it's been tested for poison, declaring nothing can endanger Mabel. He holds Mabel protectively, his gaze filled with paternal concern. Gasp! His stern expression melts into one of pure, blushing adoration. Mabel babbles happily, repeating the word kit. The Emperor coos, asking if she liked the kitten, while a skeptical Gustav internally dismisses her babbling. Squeeze. The Emperor hugs her, admitting disappointment that her first word wasn't father, which reminds Mabel of Oscar. Smiling fondly, the Emperor prepares to make a grand declaration to his daughter. He looks down at a curious Mabel, vowing to bestow a gift upon her. As a dazed Mabel looks on, the Emperor gives an order to Gustav, who prepares to take notes. Shudder, Mabel is stunned to hear her father order the transfer of the northern forest to her name. He declares that since she likes the kitten, he'll give her the forest it lives in, and Gustav quickly agrees. Grimace. The Emperor notices Mabel seems unhappy with her extravagant gift. The aide suggests she's unimpressed because the wild forest isn't as manicured as the imperial family's villas. The Emperor considers the aide's point, while the aide inwardly fumes that a baby wouldn't know about landscaping. To remedy this, the Emperor declares he will also bestow Fawn's castle upon her. He assures her the forest will be hers too, but Mabel is just annoyed by his ridiculousness. Clunk, the scene shifts to a grand hall in Ermino, which is receiving special visitors. A smiling elder in white robes formally greets His Majesty. The Emperor sits, looking weary as he contemplates the visitor's arrival. With a sly smile, the Emperor wishes the visitor from the Holy Empire luck and a swift return home. The elder asks to greet the Winter of Ermino, a formal title for the princess. The Emperor's expression hardens as he sharply corrects the man, stating her name is Mabel Gardenia Ermino. A tense moment passes as the two men stare each other down over the sacred title. Glance, Gustav watches nervously, aware that Winter is a title from a prophecy. A sleeping Mabel is shown, prophesied by the heavens, to bear the name Winter. The Emperor stands resolutely, his expression cold and unyielding. Clench, he grips a stone railing, dismissing the prophecy and the circumstances of Mabel's birth as mere coincidence. Smirk, the visitor from Abelardo states he expected such a reaction from the Emperor. Crack. The Emperor's power flares, shattering the stone railing, as Gustav begs him not to kill their guest. As his aide fears his old temper returning, the Emperor angrily asks if they expect him to send his infant daughter to Abelardo. A jeweled pendant is presented in an ornate box. Clench, the Emperor holds the pendant, recalling the past debt owed to the Abelardo Empire and refusing to repay it with his child. The holy man calmly denies that this is their intention. The Emperor accuses him of trying to buy his child. The visitor drops the subject, but requests a different favor, which the Emperor reluctantly agrees to hear. The holy man smiles, requesting a personal audience with Princess Mabel. An elder in white robes states the conditions: stay 60 feet from Mabel and use no divine powers. The elder frets over the Emperor's protectiveness, while the Emperor smirks, vowing to stop any threat to his daughter. A blonde maid, Madame Rufi, asks another maid if someone named Ravi has gone somewhere. Suck. Mabel notes internally that her nanny and a maid named Larima seem preoccupied. Grown, Mabel feels dejected as a wave of heaviness washes over her, but she resigns herself to it. A smiling Oscar arrives with a book, asking if she was waiting. But Mabel internally scoffs at the strange boy's constant visits. Sit. Oscar sits happily beside the bassinet, ready to read to Mabel. Mabel internally pictures a child's drawing of a princess with a sword and a cat, wondering what the book is about. Inhale, Oscar takes a breath and begins to read a complex text from a glowing book. Twitch, Mabel is incredulous that a 6-year-old is reading dense academic theory to a 3-month-old baby. As Madame Rufi smiles in the background, Oscar continues reading aloud from the book. Tui, Mabel spits her pacifier out in protest, shocking Oscar, who asks if she dislikes the story. Oscar cheerfully promises a better book next time, while Mabel inwardly sighs, blaming his behavior on overzealous parenting. Murmur. Oscar turns toward the door upon hearing voices, Wondering aloud if it is Kit. Squeeze. Madame Rafi puts a reassuring hand on Oscar's shoulder, sensing something is different about today's visitors. The grand doors swing open, revealing the Emperor leading a group of robed men into the room. The Emperor enters with a grim expression, receiving a formal greeting. Swarm. The robed men from Abelardo enter the room, their leader smiling warmly. A curious Mabel watches the newcomers with wide, shimmering blue eyes. The holy man and his followers stand together, surrounded by a radiant, divine light. Throb. Mabel feels a strange, throbbing sensation as she stares at the men. The smiling holy man gazes warmly in her direction. Step. The holy man approaches, remarking that the princess is very healthy and full of divine power. Mabel internally recoils, feeling a growing sense of nausea from his presence. The Emperor blocks the holy man's path, reminding him of the strict conditions for the visit. The holy man speaks of an oracle and her awakening divine power, which Mabel can feel, leaving her confused. Throb. The room seems to blur, as Mabel feels increasingly nauseous, unable to understand what they are saying about her. The holy man looks past the Emperor toward the bassinet, where Mabel and Oscar are. Wah! As Mabel begins to cry, Oscar gently strokes her head, telling her the visitors are just priests from Abelardo. Mabel wonders why they are there, as the Emperor, seeing her distress, commands the priests to leave at once. The holy man respectfully agrees to the Emperor's order to depart. The visitor mentions they heard of the capture of the demon of Devlin, who is shown magically chained and restrained. The Emperor explains the prisoner's capture was difficult due to his immense power, as the boy glares with glowing red eyes. Groan. Mabel grimaces upon hearing the title, The Demon of Devlin. The holy man reports that Devlin's alarming movements now extend toward the Holy Empire. Jolt. The Emperor is visibly startled by this revelation, as the visitor questions Devlin's motives. The Emperor's expression hardens as he considers the grave implications of the news. Glance. The holy man announces his departure, and a light flares in Mabel's eye as she watches him. Before leaving, the holy man formally addresses the princess by her full name and title. Gasp. Mabel breathes a sigh of relief as the nauseating feeling disappears with the priest's departure. Lying peacefully, Mabel considers that she didn't sense any hostility in the man's eyes. She wonders why she has such a bad feeling as she, Oscar, and Madame Rufi watch the robed figures leave. Oscar remarks to his father that the priest from Abelardo gave up much more easily than he'd expected. The Emperor stares after the departed guests with a cold and suspicious look. He ponders why they brought up the Devlin Empire, while Mabel rubs her eyes, thinking it sounds suspicious. Mabel concludes that Abelardo wants something from her, and the Emperor is trying to stop them. Oscar looks down at her with a questioning, "Huh." Oscar smiles, telling Mabel not to worry about it, but she internally complains about being left out of the loop. The scene transitions to a beautiful view of the palace gardens, framed by vibrant red roses. Late at night, a palace corridor is quiet, as someone thinks that the princess is sleeping soundly. Whisper. Madame Rufi instructs a male servant to leave the room quietly so they don't wake the princess. Step, step, the door clicks shut, leaving the grand room in silence. Clench. A tense Mabel trembles in her bassinet, sighing with frustration that she wants to walk soon. She internally complains that the love showered on her by her smiling father and brother makes her uncomfortable. A sad Oscar looks on as she wonders who would truly want someone like her as family. Throb. She feels a pang of guilt, thinking that she's lying to everyone. Thud. A sudden noise jolts Mabel, who wonders where it came from as a presence enters the room. Wish. Her head whips toward the sound as she realizes someone is there. Whoosh. A cloaked figure stands by the window as Mabel realizes someone has come into her room. Squeeze. She shuts her eyes tight, realizing the intruder snuck in through the window, meaning it isn't her family. In the darkened hallway, she deduces that anyone sneaking into a baby's nursery cannot have good intentions. Feeling queasy, she recognizes the same nauseating feeling from earlier and realizes it must be the man from before. Step. Her eyes widen in fear as the figure approaches her bassinet. Lean, the holy man from Abelardo, looms over her, smiling as he notes she's awake, and Mabel recognizes the priest. A single tear falls from Mabel's eye as she stares up at the unwelcome visitor. As the priest reaches for her, Mabel realizes she must get him caught and begins to cry, making him flinch. Wah! She continues to cry, mentally challenging the kidnapper. As he looks on in shock, the nervous priest tries to shush her, but Mabel silently resolves not to stop. Inhale, she lets out an ear-splitting wail that echoes down the hall, alerting a figure who begins to dash toward her room. Clunk, her cries startle the Emperor, who drops what he's holding. Bang! The priest finds the door locked and realizes he must leave at once. As a hand reaches for her again, Mabel silently screams for the kidnapper to go away. She feels helpless, despairing that she's just a baby and doesn't want to be kidnapped. With a desperate final effort, Mabel manages to flip herself over onto her stomach. Plop, lying on her stomach amidst some flowers, Mabel is stunned that she managed to roll over. She looks on with wide, sparkling eyes, surprised by her own accomplishment. First, the Emperor throws the doors open, shouting, "Mabel!" His eyes burn with fury as the priest jolts in terror at being caught. An intimidating aura surrounds the Emperor as he approaches the priest, addressing him as Montague. The Emperor furiously demands to know what he did to his daughter, and the priest frantically insists he did nothing. He questions why Mabel would be on her stomach if the priest hadn't done anything. Pat, the Emperor gently strokes Mabel's head as the priest begins to stammer an explanation. Shout. The priest has a sudden, shocked realization. He exclaims that Her Imperial Highness rolled over all by herself, causing the Emperor's expression to twitch. Shing. The Emperor draws his sword as the terrified priest swears on the name of Hades that he is telling the truth. Huff, feeling guilty, Mabel decides to help the priest by trying to roll over again. Trembling with effort, Mabel strains, but finds she can't roll over a second time. Roar, the Emperor's power erupts in fury because he didn't get to see Mabel roll over, leaving her and the priest stunned. Sigh. Elsewhere, concerned officials discuss the security breach, shocked someone tampered with the barrier. They worry about how the priest bypassed the guards, knowing the knights will be held responsible. A symbolic image shows baby Mabel on a throne, shadowed by a long-haired woman who may be her mother. The officials deduce that the priest must have created a rift in the enchanted barrier during his earlier audience with Mabel. Staring out the window, the Emperor seethes that he should have ripped the priest's eyes out, making his men flinch. While the men panic about diplomatic friction, Oscar mutters that his father is right, and they should have ripped the priest's eyes out. An aide named Gerald cautiously advises the Emperor that punishing the priest might be excessive. The Emperor dismisses diplomatic consequences, stating his only concern is that Mabel cried, which makes Gerald fear for his life. Gerald realizes with dread that the rumors about the Emperor's intense devotion to his daughter are true. The Emperor clarifies he only held back from dismembering the priest because Mabel was present, and Gerald silently thanks her for the save. The Emperor turns to Gerald, entrusting him with making a decision on another matter. A white-haired man asks the royal knights for a volunteer to be Mabel's personal guard. Droop. The knights hang their heads, realizing the cushy-sounding job is actually far too risky. The white-haired man's expression turns icy as he asks if none of them are willing to volunteer. Clunk. A door opens, and a lone knight steps forward to address his majesty. The black-haired knight confidently announces that he shall guard Her Imperial Highness. The scene shifts to a beautiful view of the palace, framed by pink roses. Suck, suck, suck. The sounds of a baby come from an ornate golden crib. Two servants gossip about a priest named Montague, with one accusing the other of being a liar. Mabel overhears, noting that the two are close friends despite their bickering. Tiptoe, the newly appointed black-haired knight, quietly approaches Mabel's crib. He smiles warmly at the sleeping baby, softly calling her little princess. Tui, startled awake, Mabel spits her pacifier out in shock. Thunk, it hits the floor. Crouch. The knight kneels beside her crib, noting that her pacifier fell out as she waves her arms in distress. He explains he can't give the dirty pacifier back to her, causing her to cry out, "Wah!" The knight looks on awkwardly as he holds the pacifier. Mabel internally fumes, demanding to know who this man is and why he's being so friendly. The blonde-haired nanny enters, greeting the man as Sir Donovan, leaving Mabel to wonder how her nanny knows him. Sir Donovan turns to the nanny with a warm, welcoming smile. He kisses her hand, greeting her as Madame Rufy. Mabel is shocked to learn her nanny, Countess Aliel, shares a last name with the previous empress. As Madame Rufy expresses relief that the famed swordmaster will be guarding Mabel, a startled Mabel realizes this man is her new guard. Pout, Mabel questions how she can trust a member of the previous empress's family, suspecting he must dislike her. Believing he's a playboy for flirting with her nanny, Mabel claps to get him away. He flinches, realizing she doesn't like him, as the nanny worries she's troubled. Flail, Mabel cries out for her nanny, who notes it's rare for her to ask to be held. Pat, Pat, the nanny comforts Mabel, reassuring Sir Donovan that the princess is normally sweet and well-behaved. Beam, Mabel gives her nanny a bright smile. Squeeze, the nanny hugs a confused Mabel, who wonders what nonsense the knight is spouting. Gasp. Sir Donovan is awestruck, declaring Mabel an angel from the heavens, while an annoyed Mabel questions if this moron is truly the best man for the job. Mabel fears the Emperor must hate her, recalling the red-haired man mockingly commenting on how long a previous guard lasted. Squeeze, she clenches her fist, convinced her suspicions are reasonable. The nanny, Sir Donovan, and Mabel stand together in a moment of silent awkwardness. A portrait of Oscar is shown as a narrator, explains that the pressures of being heir forced him to act like a grown-up. Clack! Oscar bursts into the room calling for Mabel, who internally complains that he didn't even knock. Oscar sees the knight and flinches, respectfully addressing him as Uncle. Straightened, Oscar stands at attention, reporting that he finished his assignments before coming to play. Sir Donovan sternly rebukes Oscar, calling his desire to play immediately after his duties conduct unbecoming of a successor. He continues to lecture the young boy, stating his carelessness is tarnishing the family name. Mabel thinks her uncle is being far too strict, believing a 6-year-old should be allowed to run and play. Flinch, the nanny looks concerned, and Mabel remembers she used to be Oscar's nanny too. Flump, a dejected Oscar turns and walks away from the group. While Mabel suddenly lets out a loud cry, causing Oscar to flinch and turn back in surprise. Sob, Mabel looks at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. As the surprised nanny notes, Mabel rarely cries. Oscar dashes toward his distressed sister. Wail, Oscar rushes to Mabel's side, asking what's wrong and trying to comfort her. He gently lifts his little sister into a comforting embrace. Oscar smiles sweetly at Mabel while Sir Donovan watches from the background. Glare, Mabel stares daggers at Sir Donovan from over Oscar's shoulder. While Oscar questions his uncle, Mabel internally tells the man to go away. Sir Donovan simply orders him to be quick. Roar, Mabel shouts, Kit at a confused Sir Donovan, thinking that while embarrassing, it's all she can do for now. Slide, the nanny steps in, telling a dazed Sir Donovan that the princess is just shy and he should guard from outside. Squeeze, the nanny holds the children protectively, giving a stern look, as Mabel marvels at her nanny's adept use of white lies. The man pats Oscar's head, telling him to have fun with Mabel, and Oscar nervously agrees, calling him uncle. Madame Rufy reassures Oscar that his uncle is gone, but Mabel inwardly sighs at his childish question. A man identified as Lit walks down a grand, sunlit palace corridor. An auburn-haired woman with green eyes stands with her arms crossed and a stern expression. A voice asks the woman if she truly volunteered to be Mabel's guard, and she replies that no one else was willing. The woman, Pacifica, calls a cheerful man named Lit foolish, but he retorts that she's too stiff. Lit gushes about how adorable Princess Mabel is, describing her as an angel to a stoic Pacifica. After Pacifica's cold response, Lit reminds her that he is being strict with someone else as she requested. Lit recalls how lonely Oscar looked as a child, prompting him as his uncle to spend more time with him. He remembers how the lonely young boy was strictly told not to show any hint of immaturity. He also recalls Pacifica's strict order to teach Oscar without showing him any special gentleness. Lit asks Pacifica if she doesn't think she's being too harsh on Oscar, who is only 6 years old. She coldly cuts him off with a single word, enough. Turn, Pacifica dismisses their conversation as useless chatter and orders Lit to return to his post. Scratch, a puzzled Lit wonders why she bothered to stop him in the first place. He mulls over the strange expression on Pacifica's face when he had mentioned Princess Mabel. He worries that Princess Mabel's feelings will be hurt if Pacifica treats her as harshly as she does Oscar. Deciding to worry about himself first, Lit wonders how to ensure the little princess doesn't end up hating him. As Lissandro's anxiety grew, the seasons shifted from spring into summer. The summer sun shines brightly on the sunflowers in the palace gardens. Nom Nom, a bored Mabel, wishes she couldn't remember her past life, which makes time feel incredibly slow. She proudly celebrates mastering the art of rolling over and lifting her head all by herself. Flinch. She resolves not to make the same mistake with speaking as she celebrates finally eating baby food. As she's praised for finishing her meal, Mabel already daydreams about the gourmet dishes she'll eat as an adult. She lies silently in her bassinet, lost in thought after her meal. Sparkle. Her eyes light up as she notices Lissandro Donovan hovering nervously by the door again. HMPH. She frowns, recalling how coldly he, as Oscar's teacher, treated the young boy. Enraged, she internally declares that she and Lysandro Donovan will never be on good terms. A tense moment passes, filled with her silent declaration. Sob. Elsewhere, Lysandro gets emotional just thinking about the little princess. She realizes he acts differently around Oscar and decides to use it to keep him away from her. Thump. She begins to cry out for Kit, determined to push her own narrative. As the maids start arguing over her reaction, Madame Rufy intervenes, while a dazed Mabel just wants to practice crawling. She starts to wonder if everyone now thinks she's completely obsessed with cats. She clarifies internally that she does like cats, which seems to shock Madame Rufy, who hears her thoughts. Madame Rufy smiles, misinterpreting her sparkling eyes as pure excitement to see Kit. Heh. Mabel gives a small, knowing smile, her plan working perfectly. The story continues. Set against the backdrop of the Grand Palace. Chirp, chirp, two servants take a quiet stroll through the lush rose garden. Out in the garden, Mabel realizes something she hadn't noticed from inside the palace. Madame Rufy smiles, commenting on how much warmer it feels than their last outing. As Madame Rufy lowers a parasol for shade, Mabel realizes this trip is meant to let her experience summer. Sniff, sniff, as she takes in the scents of the garden, a realization dawns on her. She sits in awe, surrounded by the vibrant beauty and fragrance of the summer roses. Madame Rufy watches the princess with a warm and gentle smile. Touch. She gently feels the soft petals of a rose, marveling at its delicate beauty. A painful memory surfaces of her past life, where she was always alone at her school ceremonies. She remembers watching other children celebrating with their families, which only highlighted her own loneliness. Blank, holding the rose, she stares into the distance, lost in the sad memory. In the quiet garden, a brilliant blue butterfly flutters among the roses, breaking the somber mood. Chirp, chirp, the serene summer scene shifts to a sparkling pond surrounded by flowers. A brown-haired man holding Mabel suggests they go see the kitten again. Peek, Mabel peers over his shoulder as he spots something hidden in the grass. She realizes it's Lysandro secretly guarding her and feels a pang of guilt. Glaring at Lysandro, she strengthens her resolve as the man wonders why she hates him so much. Step, he carries her into the woods, calling for the kitten and wondering if it's nearby. Rustle. A meow draws their attention to a small, glowing kitten that has suddenly appeared. Pad, pad. The kitten happily approaches them as the man observes that it must be glad to see her. Ba-bump, ba-bump. Mabel's heart pounds with excitement as she stares at the adorable creature. The man notices the kitten seems to have grown since their last encounter. Kneeling down with Mabel, he delights as the kitten affectionately rubs against his hand. A vision of a holy, faceless figure in white robes appears before them. Feeling hot and exhausted, Mabel wants to leave, and the man suggests they head back to the lake. He smiles warmly while holding a pouting Mabel. Glance. She bashfully turns her head away from his cheerful expression. Praised for doing a good job, Mabel feels embarrassed that everyone fusses over every little thing. As the man walks away, the glowing kitten watches him go. Mabel turns back, looking with wide, curious eyes. The man, now identified as Ravi, asks Mabel what's wrong, wondering if he just heard a voice. He dismisses the sound, thinking he was just hearing things because of the heat. Dash, he suddenly starts running across the lawn with Mabel in his arms. Dash, Mabel squeals with delight, pointing ahead and encouraging him to keep running. Pant, pant. Ravi is exhausted from being manipulated into running laps, while Lysandro is forced to follow. Mabel internally cheers, enjoying her playful punishment for Lysandro's treatment of Oscar. Huff, and out of breath, Ravi suggests they take a break before collapsing to the ground. Lying on the grass, Ravi pants for air as Mabel glances over at her nannies. She sees Madame Rufy and Lerma in conversation, realizing it's actually a lecture. Smirk, seeing her chance while everyone is distracted, Mabel decides to make a run for it. Jolt, Madame Rufy spots the exhausted Ravi and scolds him for not watching the princess. Close, Ravi apologizes and turns his attention back to Mabel, who sits beside him. Pout, Mabel looks on with a slightly disappointed expression. Scurry, internally calling Ravi weak, Mabel decides to slip away while he's worn out. Chirp, chirp. She crawls into the woods toward a strange light and peeks through the bushes. Whoosh! Her eyes widen at the sight of an unconscious, blood-splattered young man. She stares in stunned silence, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. The mysterious young man lies still, his face marked with blood. A shocking realization dawns on her. He is the demon of Devlin. Staring down at him, Mabel confirms his terrifying identity in her mind. He sleeps peacefully, unaware of her presence. Noting his bloody state and injured feet, she wonders if he escaped from prison. She looks down at the demon of Devlin with a mixture of concern and curiosity. She wishes she could wipe the blood from his face, but feels helpless in her baby body. Dooms, she grows frustrated with her inability to even speak. Deciding she can't help, she turns to crawl back into the bushes. In the distance, Madame Ruffy and Larima suddenly realize something is wrong. "Flinch!" Madame Ruffy shouts for Ravi to get up, as Mabel has crawled away, startling the baby. Ta-da! Mabel presents her discovery, having returned to the boy's side just as her caretakers approach. Realizing she's led them right to him, she begins to panic. Jolt, a sudden rustle from the leaves beneath her, makes her jump in surprise. Ravi calls out for Princess Mabel as he searches for her in the woods. Rush, with great effort, Mabel tosses a handful of leaves into the air. Twitch, the leaves land on the unconscious boy's face, causing him to stir. Scatter, as the boy's blood-red eyes slowly open, Mabel stares down at him in surprise. The boy with crimson eyes gazes up at a nervous Mabel. Flinch, hearing a voice call her title, Mabel panics, realizing she's about to be caught. Deciding this won't work, she scurries away into the forest to escape. A cheerful Ravi spots her and happily calls out her title. He scoops up the muddy princess, laughing and asking if she had fun. Looking over Ravi's shoulder, Mabel thinks to herself that she did everything she could. Lying alone in the sun-dappled forest, the boy's red eyes stare blankly. He recalls a long dream where he felt as though he were floating in darkness. A bloody memory surfaces of two horrified men in the midst of a battle. He remembers slaughtering everyone around him, friend or foe, like a weapon born only to kill. Droop, his expression saddens as he relives the grim memory. Recalling how he came to his senses while shackled, he remembers using his power to break the limiter sealing them. Crack, creak, his magical restraints shatter, and blood drips from his wounded hand. A group of guards bursts in, staring in shock at the scene. Wham! A powerful force erupts from him. A guard groans on the floor as the boy's silhouette walks away from the carnage. Guards shout that the demon of Devlin has escaped as the boy finds himself outside the Ermino Imperial Palace. He recalls that in the middle of his merciless attack, his mind suddenly cleared. He remembers that the sight of a baby with bright blue eyes was what snapped him out of his trance. Dizzy from blood loss, he feels himself start to fall. Panting, he collapses onto the grass, deciding to rest for a moment. Confident his healing powers will handle his minor injuries, he is unaware as Mabel peeks at him from the bushes. Whoosh! She determinedly plops herself onto his chest, making him wonder why she's not repulsed by the blood. He is suddenly startled by something she has placed near his face. Staring at the clover and flowers she's left on him, he can only mutter, "Oh." Fesh. A calming sensation washes over him as his mind clears once again. He feels the shackles of his curse loosening as he lies in a state of peace. Swish! Mabel hops off his chest and scurries back into the bushes. Whoosh! The boy rises, wondering about the mysterious baby as he sees Ravi carrying her away. Later that night at the palace, Mabel feels unusually warm, assuming it's from her picnic. A panicked Larima calls out to the princess, who is panting and feverish in her bassinet. Achoo! Mabel sneezes weakly as Larima begs her to hold on. A flashback reveals they were caught in a sudden downpour, causing Mabel to fall ill. Mabel lies in her bassinet, sweating and flushed with a high fever. The Emperor and a concerned man stand over Mabel's bassinet while her nannies watch from a distance. Ravi, Larima, and Madame Ruffy stand together, looking despondent and guilty. Panting heavily, Mabel struggles to breathe through her fever. While the Emperor watches, a physician tends to Mabel as Oscar peeks over the side of the bassinet. The physician assures the Emperor the medicine will bring down her fever, but he remains skeptical. The physician nervously confirms that the medicine is a fever reducer. Oscar tells his father Mabel will recover, suggesting the crowd is hindering her, just as someone dashes into the room. An official bursts in breathlessly, exclaiming that he has urgent news. The Emperor silences him with a cold glare, and the man freezes, realizing his grave error. Panting and disheveled, the man apologizes for his abrupt entrance, citing the urgency of his news. With a weary sigh, the Emperor tells him to speak, and the man announces that the demon of Devlin has escaped. He reports that the demon destroyed his restraints, incapacitated the guards, and fled to an unknown location. The Emperor realizes with dawning horror that Mabel was at the Northern Forest Lake. He orders the palace sealed and Mabel's security increased, but his aide has already doubled the order. With a worried expression, the Emperor directs the search to the Northern Forest. He dismisses his subordinates, seeking a moment of solitude. As the others leave, a sad Oscar stares back, realizing his father is staying behind. Alone, the Emperor sits by Mabel's bassinet, gently wiping her forehead. Pat, pat, he softly strokes her cheek, whispering that she is tiny and delicate. He worries he's not strong enough to endure this heartache again. He recalls gaining power and territory only to protect what was most important to him. A painful memory surfaces of his dying wife, Sienna, asking him to give her up. Clench, his hand tightens as he remembers granting her final, heartbreaking request. Remembering her apology for the cruelty of their separation, his heart aches. He recalls her final words, a sorrowful apology to him, Evan. Evan grieves, lamenting that their last words were an apology, not a confession of love. He fears Mabel will leave him too, confessing his terror of the future. Squeeze! Mabel's tiny hand grasps his finger, pulling him from his dark thoughts. Looking at her with renewed resolve, he vows to always protect her. Mabel sleeps soundly, a faint, peaceful blush on her cheeks. In a feverish haze, Mabel's past self opens her eyes, feeling dizzy and hot. Finding only expired medicine and no water, she swallows the pill anyway. She remembers her absent parents, feeling utterly alone in the city at night. Huddled under a coat, she resigns herself to her solitude, knowing no one will come. In a dream, she feels a cool touch and hears a kind voice telling her to get well soon. A single tear escapes her eye, moved by the warmth of the kind words in her dream. Still dreaming, baby Mabel smiles peacefully in her sleep. The Emperor watches over her, his expression soft and filled with concern. He remains by her side, a silent and devoted guardian through the night. A cascade of flowers illustrates her wish for the comforting dream to continue. Morning light streams through the palace doors, signaling a new day. Stretch, a well-rested Mabel wakes up to the bright morning sun. She vaguely remembers the fever and dizziness from the day before. Still groggy, she recalls a dream and thinks her dad was in it. Flop, she sits up with a rustle, a cool towel falling from her head. Looking up, she is startled to see the Emperor watching her. She wonders why the Emperor is in her room so early. The Emperor smiles gently, relieved to see her awake and alert. He checks her temperature and praises his brave daughter, leaving a confused Mabel wondering where her nanny is. Mabel notices his exhausted appearance as he prepares her next dose of medicine. Glance, she peeks at him, slowly realizing he must have cared for her all night. Overwhelmed with emotion, her eyes well up with tears. The Emperor holds her close, and she finds comfort in his gentle touch and kind voice. She reaches out a tiny hand to wipe away a tear from his eye. Her lonely past self fades as she finds comfort in the Emperor's embrace. Whoosh! He carries her out onto the sunny balcony for some fresh air. As Lerma and Madame Ruffy fuss over her, Mabel is shocked by their new rules. She recalls the Emperor ordering all her toys taken away for being potential hazards. Sulk, Mabel lies in her bed as Madame Ruffy asks what's wrong. Oscar enters, fanning himself, and gladly accepts an offer of iced tea. He scoops up Mabel, asking about her day, and she realizes who else must be near. As predicted, she glares at Lysandro in the doorway, prompting a glowing knight to hiss protectively. PF'd, the white-haired boy laughs while holding Mabel, asking if she dislikes Uncle Lysandro, while she thinks this is all for Oscar. He holds Mabel close, gently asking her not to hate Uncle Lysandro too much. A maid watches a stern-looking man named Sir Donovan, thinking he isn't a bad person and just wants what's best for her. Flinch, Mabel scowls, internally fuming that the boy is defending Lysandro and making her look like the villain. The white-haired boy, avoiding Ravi's gaze, asks him to bring the books from outside. Stack. Ravi places a large pile of books on the table as Mabel and the boy watch. The boy explains the books are his assignments, and a horrified Mabel thinks there are far too many before grabbing one to inspect it. She opens the book to find unreadable text, lamenting that she can understand the spoken language, but not the written one. HMPH, she turns her attention to a different book, pleased to see it's full of pictures. The book is revealed to be a map of the continent. Point. The boy points to a location on the map to soothe the crying Mabel. He explains that his finger is on the Ermino Empire, their home, which grew to its current size 500 years ago. He starts to point out the Holy Abelardo Empire, but then quickly dismisses the thought. The white-haired boy explains the geography, while Mabel thinks that Oscar, a 6-year-old, is a genius who puts her to shame. Mabel points at the map, wondering which country is the second largest. The boy identifies the large northern territory as the Devlin Empire, and Mabel's eye widens. He grimly explains that the Devlin Empire is constantly attempting to invade them. Mabel recalls that even Montague from the Holy Abelardo Empire seemed wary of Devlin. The boy adds that historically, there have been major wars between the two empires as they share a border. He mentions a rumor that an entire army was once killed by a single person, causing Mabel to clench her fist in disbelief. Shut, he closes the book with a sigh, realizing he's explaining complex politics to a baby. The boy tries to play with an unimpressed Mabel. Two maids giggle, remarking how well Prince Oscar is playing with the princess as he encourages her. An unseen person observes that the baby princess is able to express herself clearly. Mabel lies on a pillow, her bright blue eyes full of thought. The person continues, noting that while she rolled over late, she is now crawling and will be fine. An off-screen voice expresses relief but also admits surprise at their nanny's level of concern. Pat, a hand gently touches a sleeping Mabel's cheek as she thinks to her nanny not to worry. She thinks that after everyone leaves for the night, she moves around nonstop. A memory shows the Emperor holding baby Mabel after she spat up on him, with text sarcastically recalling her excruciating pain. Determined, Mabel grabs the rails of her crib, ready to pull herself up. Step, step, she recalls the Emperor walking at night, remembering how incredible it felt. With a cry of effort, she struggles to pull herself to her feet. Sparkle, she stands on her own 2 feet for the first time. Triumphant, she stands proudly in her crib, basking in her achievement. Tiptoe, the Emperor quietly peeks into the room. His blue eye widens in absolute shock. Waddle, a happy Mabel, takes her first steps along the crib railing. Thunk, the Emperor drops his lantern in astonishment. Flinch, Mabel is startled by the loud noise and her father's shocked expression. As the Emperor takes a step forward, a panicked Mabel wonders how she can possibly explain herself. She remembers with frustration that she can't even talk yet. Shout! The Emperor ecstatically declares his daughter a genius as a mortified Mabel shudders. Beam, he praises her for walking so suddenly, overwhelmed with pride, while Mabel silently protests that he's got it all wrong. Pleading for him to calm down, Mabel is swept into an enthusiastic hug and a flurry of kisses. He holds up a worried-looking Mabel. The Emperor beams, simply saying, "Ah, yes." His next words trigger a shocking memory for Mabel, who thinks, "What did you just say?" Her mind echoes with his unbelievable offer, a principality. The scene opens on the grand, sunlit imperial palace. In a meeting, an official reports that the demon of Devlin has reappeared. 2 other officials sitting nearby look very nervous and worried. Flip, but their emperor simply smiles gently as he reads a document. Beaming, he shares that his adorable daughter Mabel just took her first steps. Smug, he proudly declares his daughter a genius, who will soon call him father. Ta-da! He grandly announces he is giving the Principality of Vistante to Mabel, leaving his council dumbfounded. The councilmen question his decision to give away such a politically important territory. One man laughs loudly, believing it's a joke, but the emperor sternly confirms it is not. 2 of the older men share a subtle, knowing glance. The emperor adds that he plans to celebrate the occasion in spectacular fashion. His subordinates worry about what a spectacular celebration from him will entail. It is announced that this event will be the princess's first ever public appearance. With the emperor's grand announcement made, the parliamentary meeting is adjourned. An aide tries to stop him with a pile of documents, but the emperor brushes past, eager to see Mabel. Thunk, he stops short as someone addresses him from the doorway. The emperor recognizes the man with a mustache as Marquess Gardenia. The Marquess formally requests to see the princess. With a stern look, the emperor regards Marquess Gardenia and his nervous aide. The Marquess, however, simply holds a confident and pleasant smile. The emperor sighs in annoyance, thinking the Marquess's period of quiet is over. The Marquess argues that at 8 months old, it's high time for him to visit. When the emperor protests she's too young, the Marquess interrupts, pointing out that she's already walking. He declares Mabel the successor to House Gardenia, but the emperor wearily sighs that it's not yet decided. The emperor relents, telling him to file a formal request, but internally notes his suspicious expression. Elsewhere in the palace, a voice exclaims with delight from near Mabel's bassinet. Larima and Ravi dote on Mabel as she takes her first wobbly steps. Thud, she falls and begins to cry, but her caretakers laugh warmly. Madame Ruffey instructs Larima and Ravi to watch the princess while she steps away. Larima crouches down, gently encouraging the fallen Mabel to get back up. Later, Mabel finds her caretakers completely exhausted and sprawled out on the floor. Seeing her chance, Mabel quietly begins to crawl away from the sleeping duo. Madame Ruffey returns, looking nervous, with Marcus Gardenia in tow. Mabel looks up from the floor with wide, surprised eyes. The man smiles warmly, introducing himself as her grandfather. Mabel looks at him with a thoughtful, curious expression. Her nannies are amazed she said grandfather, while Mabel internally panics, realizing she spoke without thinking. Overcome with emotion, the Marquess is moved to tears that she can walk and is calling him Grandpa. Gasp! An aide is shocked as Mabel looks on, confused by her grandfather's reaction. Nah! Back in his study, the Emperor anxiously bites his thumb. He thinks to himself that he never should have allowed that old geezer to meet her. He angrily recalls the various villains, like Abelardo and now the Marquess, who are trying to take his daughter. His aide, noticing his distraction, suggests he go see the princess himself if he's so worried. The aide realizes with a sweat drop that the Emperor is trying to hide his true feelings from others. He cleverly appeals to the Emperor, suggesting the princess must be lonely and missing him. The Emperor's mood instantly brightens as his aide insists that Mabel loves him very much. The Emperor praises his wise and capable aide, Gustav, who internally admits he's just guessing. Gustav gets a shiver down his spine as the Emperor calls him the only one he can trust. The Emperor pauses for a moment to think. He smiles, having come to a decision, as a delighted Gustav says he can handle it. The Emperor eagerly rushes off, entrusting his duties to Gustav. Sniffle. Marcus Gardenia tearfully holds Mabel in his arms. A flashback introduces the beautiful Sienna Gardenia. It's revealed the Emperor asked for her hand in marriage. The narration explains the Emperor's terrible reputation as a tyrant who, after being sent to die by his father, proposed to the Marquess's precious daughter right after his divorce. Tremble, the Marquess complains that the cold-blooded Emperor tried to keep him away from her. Mabel internally sympathizes with him, feeling bad that she's his only family left. Pat. He is deeply touched as she comforts him, remarking on her kindness like Sienna's. Mabel thinks she understands his feelings, but is unsure how to react to his anger at the Emperor. Clunk, a door suddenly opens. The Emperor arrives and is greeted by Madame Ruffey. He smiles warmly, telling his daughter not to be afraid and to come to him. The Marquess formally greets the Emperor, creating a tense atmosphere. The tension between father-in-law and son-in-law erupts, and Mabel cries out that she hates it. She desperately wishes not to be stuck in the middle of their conflict. Mabel escapes the feuding men, pulling herself up on a nearby chair as Madame Ruffey looks on. In delighted surprise, a confused Mabel looks back at the three stunned adults. She holds onto the chair with a mischievous look. Meaningless competition begins as the Emperor and Marquess argue over whose talented girl she is, leaving a baffled Mabel watching from between the chair posts. As the Emperor calls for her, someone else dashes into the room. Oscar bursts in, shocked to find the Emperor and Marquess in an ominous tug-of-war over Mabel. Oscar scoops her up, leaving the two men defeated as Mabel expresses her immense relief. She wishes they would both cool their heads and stop inconveniencing her. Elsewhere, a man named Montague is being sentenced for the grave offense of attempting to kidnap a royal. Montague learns he is banished for life, considering himself lucky to have escaped execution. He stands alone in the grand hall, his punishment delivered. The scene shifts to a red-eyed man with long blonde hair, surrounded by jewels. Raise! A shocked Montague asks him to repeat himself. The red-eyed man dismisses him, calling him incompetent and saying he never expected success. Montague silently accepts the harsh critique. He condescendingly asks if Montague even understood his instructions. A flashback shows baby Mabel crawling under a large, ominous shadow. The real plan, he reveals, was to figure out a way to bring her to Abelardo. When asked for his next move, the man, Abelardo, smirks, revealing he has a new plan in mind. The scene with the disgraced Montague fades away. Abelardo smiles, confident in his future schemes. It is revealed he bears the surname Abelardo, a title reserved only for the Holy Emperor. The scene shifts to a luxurious, sunlit bathroom. Madame Rufi and Larima look on with worried expressions. Someone gently opens Mabel's mouth to inspect it. She reacts with a shocked expression. Ravi asks why Mabel is crying, and Madame Rufi explains the reason. Madame Rufi explains that the princess is just teething. Beam! Mabel is overjoyed at the news, excitedly exclaiming, "Teeth!" Madame Rufi smiles and says it's time to prepare, leaving Mabel to wonder for what. Wah! The teething pain makes Mabel cry again. Her caretakers find her crying cute and special, but Mabel is horrified, vowing never to cry again as revenge on the weirdos. First, the Emperor makes his usual energetic entrance, calling for Mabel. Grimace. She wonders how he always seems to know exactly when to appear. The Emperor bursts in, joyously declaring Mabel's teething a national holiday. Startled, Mabel panics as her father wonders what grand, ridiculous gift to give her for the occasion. Held by Madame Rufi, Mabel reaches out and makes a simple request. Cookie! The Emperor thoughtfully considers her request for cookies. His face lights up with a brilliant idea, much to the confusion of a nearby chef. Fume, a new chef, is presented to her, and Mabel internally screams that she wanted cookies, not a person. Back in his study, an aide announces the arrival of a letter from Abelardo. The camera focuses on the letter, written in elegant, arcane script. Rip, as a shocked Gustav watches, the Emperor furiously tears the letter to pieces. Drop! He lets the scraps fall from his hand with a cold, knowing smirk. A regal vision of the Emperor and Mabel appears as he resolves to protect his daughter. He reaffirms his decision to respond properly to any threat against her. Scribble, he begins writing a reply and summons Gustav. Gustav nervously holds the finished letter, questioning if the Emperor is sure about sending it. The Emperor smiles, deciding to prepare a grand welcome for His Holiness's rare visit. The scene shifts to the palace, as the narration declares it's Mabel's first birthday. Madame Rufi smiles down at Mabel, suggesting it's time for them to get ready too. Blink, Mabel sees her reflection for the first time in a mirror adorned with roses. Bump, her heart flutters as she takes in her own appearance. Blushing, she thinks it's a bit embarrassing to have such thoughts about herself. She cups her cheeks, admitting to herself that she's incredibly cute. Giggle, Larima realizes with a smile that it's the princess's first time with a mirror. A man scolds Mabel for being a baby and tells Larima to hand over the papers she scribbled on for safekeeping. Madame Rufi asks Larima for assistance, and she readily agrees. A special dress, adorned with delicate yellow flowers, has been prepared for the occasion. Mabel looks on with wide, curious eyes at her birthday outfit. The camera pans over the dress's beautiful lace and golden ruffles. The magnificent white and gold gown is displayed in all its glory. Mabel looks at the dress in awe, wondering if she can really wear something so beautiful. Brush. Madame Rufi gently styles Mabel's hair, remarking on its beautiful color. Russell, dressed in her new gown, Mabel quietly reflects that she has her mother's hair. All dressed up, Mabel looks ethereal in her gown and delicate lace veil. Larima and Ravi are stunned, exclaiming how gorgeous her Imperial Highness looks. Squeal! Larima rushes over to gush about how unbelievably cute Mabel is. Clunk, creak. A set of grand doors slowly opens. The Emperor appears, looking regal in his formal white and gold military dress. Stride, he walks confidently into the room as his attendants watch in admiration. He gives a soft, warm smile, his eyes filled with affection. Dazed, Mabel stares up at her father, thinking he looks completely different in formal wear. Lift, he gently picks her up, his gaze soft. The Emperor holds his daughter close, smiling down at her with pure adoration. Mabel recalls her lonely past life, where she spent her birthdays alone and couldn't afford gifts. Dash! Gustav rushes in, announcing it's time for the Emperor and Princess to make their entrance. The Emperor turns his attention from Mabel to his anxious aide. Grin! Gustav smiles proudly, but Mabel thinks he looks like he's at death's door. An exhausted Gustav stands behind them as Mabel deems her father the, quote, worst boss ever. The Emperor tells Mabel not to look at Gustav, leaving his aide utterly flabbergasted. Chatter, they arrive before the grand ballroom doors, ready to enter. Bobump, hearing the music and voices, a nervous Mabel buries her face in her father's shoulder. Standing atop the grand staircase, the Emperor senses Mabel's fear as they face the crowd. Pat, the Emperor gently holds Mabel's hand and asks if she is afraid. He reassures her that she doesn't need to impress anyone, They must impress her. Mabel is internally speechless, thinking her father's words are hardly appropriate for a 1-year-old. An announcer formally presents His Majesty the Emperor and Her Imperial Highness, Princess Mabel. Sparkle, they proceed down a grand, red-carpeted hall towards the waiting crowd of nobles. The entire hall falls silent as a nervous Mabel looks out at the attendees. The scene focuses on a grand, ornate throne of red and gold. Mabel realizes the 2 smaller thrones must be for her and Oscar, feeling uncomfortable with the attention. Suddenly finding herself sitting alone on the main throne, a confused Mabel looks down at her smiling father. The Emperor proudly welcomes everyone to the celebration of his dear daughter Mabel's first birthday. The crowd of nobles stares back, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. Overwhelmed by the stares, Mabel becomes increasingly nervous. Flinch, the guests' eyes are wide with shock, causing a panicked Mabel to recoil. Smile, the Emperor proudly boasts about his genius daughter, much to Mabel's visible annoyance. A smiling blonde woman arrives with a young boy, while the crowd and a dark-haired man look on with curiosity. Feeling humiliated, Mabel wishes she could disappear as her father welcomes the envoys. As the Emperor hopes they enjoy the banquet, Mabel shudders, recognizing the envoys' robes are from Abelardo. The Emperor reassures Mabel that the man who tried to kidnap her has been banished, so she has nothing to worry about. A voice calls out her name as a smiling, silver-haired boy, Oscar, runs into view. Oscar beams, dressed formally for the occasion. He waves, telling Mabel she looks adorable, and she tries to return the compliment. A blushing Oscar gazes at Mabel as she shyly agrees. Oscar explains their father forbade him from wishing her a happy birthday first, prompting a glare from the Emperor that Mabel finds incredibly childish. The Emperor declares he will be the first to give her a present, but Mabel is impressed that Oscar completely ignores him. A delicate silver necklace with a single green gem is presented to the wide-eyed Mabel. Oscar gently places the beautiful necklace around his sister's neck. The Emperor points out that all the boxes piled high in the hall are also presents for her. Stunned, Mabel realizes the mountains of gifts she mistook for Christmas-like decorations are all for her. The attending nobles watch the royal family's interactions with interest. Flinch, her father, asks if she is disappointed, and Mabel panics, frustrated by her inability to communicate properly. Swish, a voice reassures her that her father has prepared a marvelous present for her. Glance, Mabel's gaze sweeps over the crowd, landing on the mysterious, white-robed envoys. A hooded, blonde-haired man smiles down at Mabel, who stares back in startled recognition. The Emperor calls her name, pulling her attention away from the man. He leans in close, looking down at her with a serious expression. Raised, the Emperor stands tall with a determined look as Mabel shudders with unease. Tremble, Mabel is overcome with fear, trying to convince herself that this must all be a dream. Bump, as a massive crown is held above her head, her father declares he will abdicate the throne. Gasp, Mabel looks up in absolute horror as her smiling father presents the crown to her. The assembled nobles are completely stunned by the Emperor's shocking announcement. The robed envoys cry out in alarm, fearing what your holiness might do. The red-eyed Abelardo simply watches the chaos unfold with a confident smirk. The Emperor also smirks, thinking how long he has eagerly awaited this very moment. In a flashback, the Emperor informs a shocked Marquess Gardenia of his plan to make Mabel the Empress, citing Abelardo's constant demands for her as the reason. The Emperor explains that making her Empress is the only way to completely eradicate Abelardo's claim on her. He threatens the Marquess with never seeing Mabel again if he opposes the plan, forcing the enraged grandfather's hand. Swap, back in the present, the Emperor thinks that with the Marquess handled, it's time for the next step. Dash, a young Oscar runs into the room with a wooden sword and formally greets the Emperor. The Emperor observes how grown-up Oscar acts, even when it's just the two of them. He warmly invites Oscar to join him for a rest outside. The Emperor sits with Oscar and asks if he truly wishes to become Emperor. Clench, Oscar admits he's not sure, explaining he's only trying because it's expected of him. With wide, earnest eyes, he says the title isn't one he can simply claim or refuse. The Emperor looks on, with a knowing and gentle expression. He puts a hand on Oscar's shoulder and reveals his plan to abdicate the throne to Mabel, shocking the boy. Clench, Oscar's expression hardens with determination as he declares he is all for it. In a fond memory, Oscar watches over his baby sister Mabel as she sleeps peacefully. He beams, joyfully declaring that all he wants is to become a knight to protect her. A streak of golden light symbolizes his heartfelt vow. Clink. A beautifully ornate teacup sits on its saucer. A brown-haired woman calmly sips her tea. Clack, she sets down her cup as the Emperor pauses, having just explained that Oscar has no desire for the throne and is more skilled with the sword. Chuckle. The woman smiles, reminding the Emperor that Oscar had already told him as much. The Emperor admits he hasn't spoken to Oscar in a week and wonders if the woman discussed it with him. Whisper, whisper. The nobles gossip about the Empress in name only, the Marquis's agreement, and the Emperor retaining his power. A satisfied smile graces the Emperor's face. As he contemplates his victory, he thinks of Abelardo with contempt, vowing that he dared to try and steal his daughter. Murmur. The Emperor names Mabel Gardenia Ermino as his successor, shocking the Marquess and the crowd. The nobles murmur in disbelief, while the brown-haired woman calmly sips her champagne. The robed envoys panic, realizing they can no longer take Mabel to Abelardo. Mabel is pictured floating serenely in a dreamlike golden space. Abelardo crosses his arms, wondering why the Emperor would go to such trouble. His confused followers whisper among themselves. The envoys grumble about the fiercely overprotective Emperor, asking Abelardo if he has another plan. A partial view of the Emperor shows his confident smile. Abelardo shocks his followers by saying his plan is gone now, asking if they are kidding him. Abelardo gazes at a vision of baby Mabel, wondering when she will finally bloom. A hooded figure looks toward a glowing throne, thinking of the seat of God. A brilliant blue power flashes above Abelardo's gleaming red eyes. Mumble, he smiles, whispering a new plan to himself. The Emperor watches on with a cold expression, remarking, "That's too bad." Memory of a pink-haired woman holding a baby surfaces as the Emperor resolves to act. He lovingly holds his daughter Mabel close. Tremble, tremble. A nervous Mabel stands by her father as he regrets not consulting her, assuming she wouldn't understand. Done. The realization hits Mabel with full force. "I'm an empress?" As her father calls her name. Nod. Her father confirms it, and Mabel begins to wail, "Don't wanna!" A blonde woman in a pink dress gasps in shock, calling out to her Imperial Highness. The woman rushes to comfort the crying baby Mabel. As the Emperor stands stunned, Mabel inwardly screams that he's an insufferable moron for doing this on her first birthday. A concerned Oscar approaches his teary sister, asking why she's crying. Mabel mentally fumes, questioning why nobody is objecting to the empire being handed to a 1-year-old. A flustered Emperor can only wonder why his daughter is crying. He orders the blonde woman to take the distraught Mabel back to her room. Open. Mabel's eye opens to the morning light streaming through a window. She recalls the tense relationship between her father and her grandfather, the Marquess. Her thoughts turn to Oscar and his mother, Duchess Donovan. She notes that Duchess Donovan seemed completely unfazed by the news that robbed her own son of the throne. Now, in a room, a tiny, bewildered Mabel sits on a checkered floor, weighed down by an enormous crown and royal cape. She looks at the adults who surround her and realizes with dawning horror that they were all in on it. Wah! She lets out a final, frustrated cry. Thump, thump. A wailing Mabel throws a tantrum in her bed. Flail, flail. Her attendants struggle to hold her, confused by her frantic distress. As her attendants wonder why she is throwing a tantrum again today, Mabel thinks they are clueless. A single tear traces her cheek as she glares with defiant anger. In a rosy vision, the white-haired Emperor sits on a throne and happily calls her name. Her attendants listen intently as Mabel carefully babbles the word Baba. The brown-haired maid excitedly deciphers the word, realizing Mabel wants to see her papa, the Emperor. An off-screen voice confirms if Her Imperial Highness wishes to see His Majesty. The maid carries Mabel through a grand hall to meet with an attendant. Fume. Mabel's face turns red as she seethes with silent frustration. Tug, tug. She yanks on her maid's dress, furious about the talk of her becoming empress. Her maid patiently helps a wobbly Mabel take her first steps. Waddle, waddle, Mabel toddles forward with grim determination, vowing to make them pay. She approaches the open doors of an elegant, empty room. Beam, from the Emperor's point of view, Mabel waves with a bright, angelic smile. The Emperor is instantly smitten by what he perceives as a loving gesture. In reality, an enraged Mabel stomps towards him with a menacing glare. Pow, pow, pow! She unleashes a flurry of tiny punches against his chest, thinking he's a fool. The Emperor, completely misinterpreting her anger, holds her close and is touched by her apparent affection. Throb, throb, her little fists ache from hitting him. She realizes with frustration that his body is as tough as steel. With a deep pout, she laments being a baby while envying adults who can eat ice cream. Flinch, she recoils as a spoonful of food is offered to her. Gnome, she smiles, and happily accepts the bite. After a sip from a glass, she sputters in disgust, realizing she's gotten sidetracked. Bang, she slams her tiny fist down in protest. Her face is a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Dash, she waddles away, leaving a stunned emperor behind. Bump, the emperor sits frozen on his throne, hand over his heart in shock. A nervous aide timidly addresses the stunned emperor. The aide wonders in disbelief what he just heard. The opulent hall is filled with a tense, golden silence. Looking utterly shocked, the emperor calls out Mabel's name. From behind a door, a small voice shouts for him to go away. Wail, she breaks down into a fit of angry tears. As two men watch from behind a screen, Mabel continues to scream no at her father. Throb, the emperor's heart aches as he looks on with a pained expression. Thud, the large doors are slammed shut, sealing him out. Stagger, a heartbroken emperor nearly faints, caught by his concerned aide. The man in the red uniform smiles slyly, noting that Mabel seems to hate people. A simple stick figure diagram humorously illustrates his point about Mabel's dislike. Grit, the emperor clenches his jaw, infuriated by the man's insolent remark. He despairs over being in the same miserable situation as someone named Lysandro Donovan. Alone again, Mabel thinks that simply keeping the emperor out won't solve her problems. She sits glumly in her large crib, looking defeated. A cheerful white-haired boy with green eyes peeks in, asking what she's doing. Stare, Mabel looks back at him with a flat, unimpressed expression. A portrait shows the diligent white-haired boy, who is studying to be the emperor's successor. The hopeful boy continues to smile at her, waiting for a reaction. Fidget, Mabel clasps her hands, thinking to herself that Oscar must be heartbroken over this. Oscar marvels at his little sister, calling her the cleverest baby in the world for understanding him. Glare, an unamused Mabel stares back at her laughing brother. Cradled in his arms, Mabel wonders what he's thinking. Oscar closes his eyes and smiles, cherishing the tender moment with his sister. Oscar explains from off-screen that his duty is to study hard, so he can support Mabel when she becomes empress. Hug, he embraces her, declaring he's elated for the chance to support her. As he tells her not to worry, she looks on with a pensive expression. Scoff, the white-haired emperor smirks on his throne, dismissing his subjects as incompetent fools after a report. Jolt, his advisors flinch, relieved his anger wasn't directed at them. A black-haired aide internally worries, noting the emperor has been in a foul mood all week. The emperor maintains a calculating, confident smile. The narrator introduces the influential but suspicious Duke Javier, who is secretly involved in the Southern Mines. Tap, tap. The emperor's thoughts reveal it's impossible to find evidence of the duke's wrongdoings. He laments the many noble families ruined by the duke, wishing he had a chance to get rid of him. Clunk, the black-haired aide enters the room and gasps in shock. Sway, the emperor suddenly appears faint and unsteady. The aide rushes to support the staggering emperor, worried that he's been pushing himself too hard. Murmur, the other court officials watch the scene unfold with concern. The emperor touches his forehead, thinking longingly of Mabel. The officials are left completely stunned and confused by his sudden change in mood. Sigh, his aide looks on with a knowing, resigned smile. From his desk, the emperor sarcastically asks if his aide is hoping he'll die. The aide vehemently denies it, proceeding to scold the emperor for skipping meals and neglecting his health. The emperor listens with a slightly bewildered expression. Teary, the aide looks at him with genuine, heartfelt concern. Glare, the emperor retorts that his aide must not have enough work to do. Shout, the aide panics, frantically insisting that he has more than enough work. Thunk, a sound echoes through the grand, empty hall. Dash, the emperor abruptly rushes out of the room, leaving his aide calling after him. The aide chases after him, terrified that he's about to do something reckless. The scene shifts to a peaceful garden, where Mabel happily nibbles on a cookie beside Oscar. From a distance, the emperor and his aide watch the children quietly. Rustle, a sudden sound in the foliage catches Mabel's attention. The emperor smiles softly, remarking to his aide that Mabel seems to have grown a little taller. As they walk away, the emperor sadly admits that he thinks Mabel hates him. Back on the garden swing, Oscar asks a confused Mabel what's wrong. Glow, a brilliant golden light, suddenly emanates from the nearby bushes. Pad, a small, golden, cat-like creature emerges, surprising both siblings. Mabel looks on in wide-eyed, speechless wonder. The mystical creature gives Mabel a knowing, smug little smirk. Jump. The creature suddenly leaps from the ground directly into her lap. Mabel stares in awe as the creature curls up on her lap. Waving her arms, she happily babbles, Kit, while Oscar encourages her to pet it. Ba-bump. Her heart pounds with excitement as she gently pets the warm creature. Oscar wonders aloud if he's hearing things, while Mabel internally insists that he is not. Wish. The cat glares as Mabel is suddenly pulled away, thinking, I'm right here. Wince. An annoyed Mabel wonders what's happening this time and considers passing out. Poke. The cat creature sniffs at a pile of food on the ground, thinking disdainfully about eating it. Throb. A strange, overwhelming sensation pulses through Mabel. She sleeps peacefully in the embrace of a massive, shadowy, wolf-like figure who declares, I told you. A voice declares itself God's messenger, born to serve her. Stare. An unimpressed Mabel thinks this is hard to believe. A servant informs the nanny their walk must be cut short, startling Mabel. Hug. The nanny picks Mabel up, explaining they need to take her measurements, as Mabel internally panics that it's not fair. The cat creature lets out a long, disappointed meow, wanting something to eat. The scene transitions to a grand view of the palace from a sunlit balcony. Carried by her nanny, Mabel looks back and spots the white-haired emperor talking with his men. With wide, curious eyes, Mabel watches him intently. As the emperor looks on thoughtfully, Mabel recalls hearing a rumor that he collapsed during a meeting. The emperor turns his head slightly. Mabel continues to watch him from a distance. Looking out at the palace, she muses on his cold behavior. The scene shifts to a peaceful image of Mabel sleeping, framed by roses. Clench. The emperor is seen from behind, a tense gesture hinting at his inner turmoil. A dark, abstract texture marks a passage of time. Walking with his aides, the emperor resolves to focus on preparations for Mabel's coronation. A white-haired official makes an animated announcement to a crowd. Lean, a sleeping Mabel rests as a new day dawns. Chatter, a crowd of nobles gathers for an important event. Creak, massive doors swing open, revealing a brilliantly lit hall. Murmurs of majesty and ascend echo through the grand, empty hall. A figure in a royal cloak thinks about how loud the room is. A blurry vision of the white-haired emperor comes into focus. The emperor stands serenely in his full ceremonial regalia. Mabel is shown in a beautiful new dress, looking confused. Frown, she wonders why she's so glad to see him, insisting she didn't miss him. She questions why he's so dressed up as she stares at his back. Looking around, she realizes with a jolt that this is not her room. But bump. Her heart pounds in sudden understanding. She finds herself seated on a massive throne before a crowd of onlookers. Her face fills with shock and confusion. Who are all these people? She wonders in a panic. Reach. The emperor reaches for the royal crown. As he prepares to place it on her head, she realizes with horror that this is her coronation. Spring! She leaps up, furiously thinking that she doesn't want to be empress. She internally rages at the decision being made without her consent. Shouting no, she makes a run for it. Scurry, she babbles Empwe. Done, Wana. In protest. Swoosh, crash, she knocks the crown from its cushion, sending it flying. Huff huff, she pants as the crown lands with a clunk beside the throne. Kick, she furiously sends the crown flying, yelling for it to get out of her sight. A surprised emperor calls out her name, Mabel. Flinch, Mabel freezes, looking suddenly apprehensive. Clap, clap, clap. The crowd erupts in applause, praising her noble and valiant kick as a sign of a great ruler. Cheer, the nobles celebrate, declaring she will be a strong monarch who can't be swayed by others. The emperor approaches Mabel, who sits on the floor looking up at him as he holds the crown. Plop, he places the comically oversized crown on her head. He smiles warmly, explaining the old crown has been retired. As he declares a new empress deserves a new crown, a stunned Mabel wonders when he even had it made. Clap, clap, the emperor smiles, telling Mabel the empress title suits her. In her mind, Mabel begins a solemn declaration about the empire. Cheer. The nobles erupt in celebration, and she internally declares that this empire is beyond hope. A formal portrait of the newly crowned, unamused Empress Mabel is captioned with her quote, "This country is doomed. Grr, now in a new room, an angry Mabel realizes her tantrum was useless and squeezes a tiny crown in frustration. A dark-haired man formally greets, "Your Majesty, the sublime son of Ermino." The man kneels before Mabel, who is in a large chair, as she thinks a firm no. A seasoned pro, the man cheerfully waves her off, saying there's no work today and her duties begin tomorrow. Mabel lets out a huge yawn, having been battle-hardened by dealing with the Emperor. Dash. The man happily departs, wishing Her Majesty a good day until tomorrow. Spin, spin. Mabel is playfully spun around in her grand chair. Dudun, her attendant, a blonde woman in a blue dress, approaches with a smile. The woman asks if Her Majesty would like to play, offering to remove her mittens. Rattle. She is handed a simple pink baby's rattle. Rattle, rattle. A stressed and tearful Mabel furiously shakes the rattle, thinking this is what she should be holding, not a crown. She imagines the empire collapsing as she wields the rattle, believing its downfall is only a matter of time. Rattle, rattle. A small, devious smile appears on her face. She sets her new goal. From this day on, she will be dethroned. The scene shifts to an ornate room with a fireplace. Murmur. During a meeting, the council members are overjoyed to have the adorable Empress present, while she finds time passing at a snail's pace. Her grandfather, the Marquess, smiles contentedly, thinking he can now have his fill of Her Majesty. Step. A cheerful red-haired man with a cane enters the room. The Marquess asks how his business went, and the red-haired man replies that it went well. Ha ha ha! The red-haired man looks forward to seeing how the clever Empress governs, which is translated as him wanting to see what trouble she'll cause, as Mabel glances between the two faction heads. Ahem, an aide announces the arrival of His Majesty the Emperor. A nervous Mabel is seen surrounded by pink flowers. Scan, the attendees gush over how adorable she is up close as she looks around the room. Held by her father, Mabel looks out at the attendees, thinking they are all a bunch of fools. Now, sitting on her father's lap at the head of the table, she feels uncomfortable, realizing all she does is sit there quietly. A report is given on the Demon of Devlin, who made another appearance but behaved unusually during a border skirmish. In the middle of a killing spree, he reportedly stopped as if he'd come to his senses. Mabel recognizes the name Demon of Devlin, realizing he escaped and is a murderer, and now questions her choice to hide him that day. A memory of a bloody hand appears as she considers her decision. An aide reports on a petition from Viscountess Vincent, noting it's the third one she submitted regarding her husband moving his mistress into the main manor. Both Mabel and her father look annoyed as she internally calls the Viscount a piece of work. The report continues. The Viscountess, who is pregnant, had a miscarriage after a fall in the poorly maintained annex, but the Viscount insists he moved her there for her own peace and quiet. Mabel clenches her fists in rage, thinking the good-for-nothing Viscount is worse than scum. Bonk, the Emperor gently taps his head, seemingly at a loss. With furious determination, Mabel tries to declare a sentence of death for Viscount Vincent. Thump, thump, her heart pounds with the effort of her pronouncement. Nod, nod, she internally confirms her decision to put the Viscount to death. Bang, she slams her tiny fist on the table for emphasis. Stagger, a Viscount in the room swoons dramatically, crying that Her Majesty has put him to death. Her grandfather also feigns a dramatic collapse while the Emperor laughs in the background. Fume. A blushing and furious Mabel realizes they are all making fun of her. Squeeze, she lies face down in frustration, thinking the situation is unbelievable. The council members, however, are simply delighted by how well she's stamping the documents. Whack, whack! Filled with one-year-old angst, Mabel flails about, vowing to be dethroned if it's the last thing she does. Sparkle, a young, blonde-haired boy with golden eyes appears. Smiling blonde boy bashfully asks who she is. Mabel observes him, thinking he'll be a heartbreaker, before a white-haired boy shoves the first boy away, telling him not to scare her. Rub, rub, the white-haired boy affectionately hugs Mabel, much to the other boy's shock. Shudder. The blonde boy looks intimidated, as the white-haired boy, still holding Mabel, asks if he's Oscar. Oscar leans in for a closer look at the baby Empress. The white-haired boy draws his sword, scolding Oscar for his insolence, and demanding a proper greeting for Her Majesty. Bow. Oscar immediately bows, apologizing for his momentary disrespect. A tiny hand reaches out toward him. The hand gently pats his head, and a startled Oscar looks up, stammering, Your Majesty? Stroke, stroke. Mabel happily pats Oscar's head as he blushes in confusion. The white-haired boy shouts Mabel's name in protest. Shout. The blushing white-haired boy demands that she stroke his hair too, shocking Mabel. Stroke, stroke. Mabel calmly pats both boys on the head. The scene shifts to a dark, smoky castle under a grim purple sky. A young, red-eyed boy with dark hair looks on with a haunted expression. A vow is recalled, one of a knight sworn to Devlika, promising to kill the soldiers of Ermino. A bloody dagger appears as a shadowy figure mocks someone named Aiden for a foolish act, reminding him his body is immortal. Aiden clutches a wound on his chest as the voice commands him to obey and accept his fate. A close-up reveals his glowing red eye. He remembers the moment his eyes met hers. He recalls feeling as though he were being freed from all restraint. His blood-stained figure stands in darkness, facing a sliver of light. He wonders what she will be able to give him. His gaze is fixed, his red eyes filled with a new purpose. The scene transitions to a bright and peaceful day. Knock, knock. A dark-haired man announces his arrival as Gustav. Frown. Mabel sits at a table with a pout. Gustav asks if she enjoyed her meal, and she reaches for him, babbling that it was good. He happily lifts a surprised Mabel into his arms as a maid smiles nearby. She wriggles in his arms, whining, "Done wanna." Looking out from a balcony, Mabel reflects that it's been 4 months since dethronement became her life's goal. She notes that while her frequent talking initially shocked everyone, they've since grown used to it. She looks down at the white-haired emperor. She wonders why he went to such lengths for her. A memory of the white-haired emperor, smiling lovingly while holding her as a baby, appears. In the present, Mabel is held by an attendant, looking thoughtful. Beam, the emperor flashes a dazzling, proud smile. Frown. Mabel remains completely unimpressed. On a balcony, the emperor jealously asks Gustav how he got on such good terms with his daughter, while a nervous Gustav begs him not to be angry. Funk. An aide announces that Her Majesty the Emperor has arrived for a meeting. Plop. A weary Mabel is placed in her large chair at the head of the council table. Flinch, she flinches and adorably demands that they all be silent. Grin. The red-haired man smiles knowingly. He turns to the side and asks another council member if he is opposed. The Marquis questions why Count Sakila is not being charged with embezzlement despite stealing imperial funds. Glare. Mabel glares at her grandfather, mentally accusing him of taking another bribe. The red-haired man is pictured with a scale, cunningly weighing bags of gold. The scene shifts to a smiling Oscar with the white-haired boy standing behind him. Mabel thinks about Oscar being a sweet boy, then dismisses the thought with a HMPH. An explanation reveals that enchanted crystals, the basis of all magic, are in short supply, causing their prices to skyrocket across the empire. Mabel thinks with a serious expression. She sits beside the emperor, both looking somber. With newfound resolve, Mabel decides it's time to get involved. That night, as 2 owls complain of hunger, a restless Mabel is awoken by the noise, already stressed from dealing with the emperor. Pad, 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 carrying her pillow, Mabel wonders if servants are chatting outside. Creak. She peeks out the window with an annoyed pout. Hoot. The 2 owls outside decide to hunt a rabbit since there are no frogs or mice. Mabel's jaw drops in utter shock. In the garden, she recoils in horror. A yawning cat sits beside her as she realizes, in shock, that she can understand animals. She overhears the name Blossom and wonders what it means. Whoosh. A mysterious voice promises she will soon be able to communicate with all living things, leaving her to question why. As she pets the cat, it reveals it knows her soul is not that of a 1-year-old. A memory of the laughing, red-haired man flashes through her mind. Looking from her father to the flowers, a determined Mabel decides to put her new ability to good use. Declaring she's all set, she lifts herself up to put on her shoes. She prepares a small satchel with a dark bow. Scribble, scribble. Gustav works diligently at his desk. He sighs with exhaustion as he flips through another document. A report reveals the imperial family's stockpile of power crystals is dangerously low. Squeeze, an excited Mabel, wearing her bag, happily greets Gustav. Gas, a startled Gustav, looks up to see Mabel on his desk, complaining that it's messy. As Mabel offers to organize his papers, an anxious Gustav insists he'll clean it up himself. Now in his chair, Mabel thoughtfully scans the desk. Smile. She gleefully holds up a small golden ink pot. Splash. Gustav watches in horror as the ink goes flying toward his documents. He lets out a silent, horrified scream. Eek! His panicked cry of, "Not the documents!" echoes through the room. A delighted Mabel waves from behind the ink-splattered desk, simply stating, "Ink." Sob! A defeated Gustav lays his head on the desk, asking her to wait while he gets something to clean up. Mabel clutches her bag, her plan still in motion. Russell, she discreetly pulls a document from inside. The document is a proposal for the purchase of the Rogwool mine. She reflects on the exhaustive effort it took to draft the document with her tiny, weak wrists. Scurry, she finds what she's looking for on the messy desk. Tremble, she firmly presses a seal onto her proposal amidst the ink spills. Shove. She slyly pushes the approved document into the official pile. The Emperor appears, his heart pounding, and asks if she came to see him, but she nervously denies it. Looking suspicious, the Emperor watches as Mabel claims she came to see Gustav. Knock, the Emperor glares, furiously deciding that Gustav will be demoted at once. A brown-haired man named Ravi arrives, happily presenting a giant bunny plushie. Rush, Mabel dashes toward him, thrilled to see her bunny pushy. The Emperor sternly addresses Ravi as he kneels before Mabel, who hugs the bunny. Mabel peeks around the toy, proudly showing it to her. Baba! The Emperor blushes, touched by the gesture. Realizing it's his first gift from her, the Emperor is lost in the moment while Mabel signals for Ravi to flee, thinking she's successfully created a distraction.